The Mystery of the Ark of the Covenant Revealed, Part 12, Thunders, Lightnings, Trumpet. Exodus chapter 19, verses 6 and 7. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the Mount Sinai, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. These pictures of Mount Sinai in Arabia, as mentioned in Galatians chapter 4, verse 25, and the split rock at Mount Horeb in Arabia, from which God provided by a miracle water for the children of Israel, are found at Wyatt Archaeological Research official site of Ron Wyatt's Discoveries View, and Mount Sinai in Arabia was located and found by Ron Wyatt and his team. 1984 was the discovery. Exodus chapter 19, verses 18 to 20. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount. And the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. At the base of Mount Sinai is a large valley where the children of Israel would have been able to encamp. Let us pray. Kind and loving Father, which art in heaven, thank you for the understanding and the lesson to learn from Mount Sinai and the people of Israel who were delivered, Father, from captivity. This is a type of what we are to go through today, and we are to prepare. We are to prepare in order to understand, Father, the wonderful message of Mount Sinai, the law given at Mount Sinai, and at the same site, the building of the sanctuary, including the Ark of the Covenant, which was to be a depository for your law, for your testimonies. We thank you for knowledge and understanding according to your riches in glory. In Yeshua's name we ask. Hallelujah. According to Ron Wyatt, after reading that Mount Sinai in Galatians chapter 4, verse 25 is to be found in Arabia, he proceeded in studying further the ancient maps. And according to, even at the time of Moses, he was able to retrace the path from the Bible when Moses and the children of Israel left Egypt from Ramses, came to Sukkot, crossed the peninsula, and reached to the Gulf of Aqaba in order to cross the Red Sea at that area. And then through their journey in the desert, they reached to Mount Sinai, as is mentioned in Galatians chapter 4, verse 25, in Saudi Arabia. If one would go to a tour of Mount Sinai today, they would be taken in Egypt through the Sinai Peninsula and reaching to the south of the peninsula, where there is a range of mountain there as well. However, according to the Bible and the discovery of Ron Wyatt in 1984, Mount Sinai is definitely in Saudi Arabia. The Mystery of the Ark of the Covenant Revealed, Part 12. Recommended Studies. Number 1, Exodus chapter 19 at Mount Sinai. Number 2, Exodus chapter 20, the Ten Commandments. Number 3, The Mystery of the Ark of the Covenant, parts 1 to 12. Number 4, Patriarchs and Prophets, chapter 25, the Exodus. Number 5, Patriarchs and Prophets, chapter 26, from the Red Sea to Sinai. Number 6, Patriarchs and Prophets, chapter 27, the law given at Sinai. Number 7, Biblical Archaeology, History, and the Ark of the Covenant. Number 8, Studies in Revelation, the number 7 in Revelation. Number 9, The Discovery of the Ark of the Covenant and Sinai by Ron Wyatt. The law given at Sinai, Exodus chapter 20. Reading from verses 1 to 3. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The Ten Commandments can be found in Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 to 17, and Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 6 to 21. We give you here the short version. Commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself any graven image. Number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Number 5, honor your father and your mother. Number 6, you shall not kill. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. Number 10, you shall not covet. Moses draw near to God at Sinai. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 303. Soon after the encampment at Sinai, Moses was called up into the mountain to meet with God. Alone he climbed the steep and rugged path and drew near to the cloud that marked the place of Jehovah's presence. Israel was now to be taken into a close and peculiar relation to the Most High, to be incorporated as a church and a nation under the government of God. The message to Moses for the people was, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle wings, and brought you unto myself. Now, therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Moses returned to the camp, and having summoned the elders of Israel, he repeated to them the divine message. Their answer was, All that the Lord hath spoken we will do. Thus they enter into a solemn covenant with God, pledging themselves to accept him as their ruler, by which they became, in a special sense, the subject of his authority. Revival and Reformation Preparation. Patriarchs and Prophets, pages 303-304. God purposed to make the occasion of speaking his law a scene of awful grandeur, in keeping with his exalted character. The people were to be impressed that everything connected with the service of God must be regarded with the greatest reverence. The Lord said to Moses, "Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai." During these intervening days, all were to occupy the time in solemn preparation to appear before God. Their person and their clothing must be freed from impurity. And as Moses should point out their sins, they were to devote themselves to humiliation, fasting, and prayer, that their hearts might be cleansed from iniquity. The preparations were made according to the command, and in obedience to a further injunction, Moses directed that a barrier be placed about the mount, that neither man nor beast might intrude upon the sacred precinct. If any ventured so much as to touch it, the penalty was instant death. Revival and Reformation Preparation. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 304. On the morning of the third day, as the eyes of all the people were turned toward the mount, its summit was covered with a thick cloud, which grew more black and dense, sweeping downward until the entire mountain was wrapped in darkness and awful mystery. Then a sound as of a trumpet was heard, summoning the people to meet with God. And Moses led them forth to the base of the mountain. From the thick darkness flashed vivid lightnings, while peals of thunder echoed and re-echoed among the surrounding heights. And Mount Sinai was altogether under smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. The glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mount in the sight of the assembled multitude. And the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder. So terrible were the tokens of Jehovah's presence that the host of Israel shook with fear and fell upon their face before the Lord. Even Moses exclaimed, as found in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 21, "I exceedingly fear and quake." I am the Lord thy God. Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 304. And now the thunders ceased. The trumpet was no longer heard. The earth was still. There was a period of solemn silence, and then the voice of God was heard, speaking out of the thick darkness that enshrouded him as he stood upon the mount, surrounded by a retinue of angels. The Lord made known his law. Moses, describing the scene, says, "The Lord came from Sinai and rose up from Seir unto them. He shined forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints. From his right hand went a fiery law for them. Yea, he loved the people. All his saints are in thy hand. And they sat down at thy feet. Every one shall receive of thy words." Jehovah revealed himself not alone in the awful majesty of the judge and lawgiver, but as the compassionate guardian of his people. "I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." He whom they had already known as their guide and deliverer, who had brought them forth from Egypt, making a way for them through the sea, and overthrowing Pharaoh and his host, who had thus shown himself to be above all the gods of Egypt, he it was who now spoke his law. The Law of the Ten Commandments, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 305. The law was not spoken at this time exclusively for the benefit of the Hebrews. God honored them by making them the guardians and keepers of his law, but it was to be held as a sacred trust for the whole world. The precepts of the Decalogue are adapted to all mankind, and they were given for the instruction and government of all. 10 precepts, brief, comprehensive, and authoritative, cover the duty of man to God and to his fellow man, and all based upon the great fundamental principle of love, as found in Luke chapter 10, verse 27, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5, and Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. In the 10 Commandments, these principles are carried out in detail and made applicable to the condition and circumstances of man. The law of the 10 Commandments. Commandment number 1. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 305. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Jehovah, the eternal, self-existent, uncreated one, himself the source and sustainer of all, is alone entitled to supreme reverence and worship. Man is forbidden to give to any other object the first place in his affections or his service. Whatever we cherish that tends to lessen our love for God or to interfere with the service due him, of that do we make a god. The law of the 10 Commandments. Commandment number 2. Patriarchs and Prophets, pages 305-306. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. The second commandment forbids the worship of the true God by images or similitudes. Many heathen nations claimed that their images were mere figures or symbols by which the deity was worshipped, but God has declared such a worship to be sin. The attempt to represent the Eternal One by material objects would lower man's conception of God. The mind turned away from the infinite perfection of Jehovah would be attracted to the creature rather than to the Creator. And as his conceptions of God were lowered, so would man become degraded. I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. The close and sacred relation of God to his people is represented under the figure of marriage. Idolatry being spiritual adultery, the displeasure of God against it is fitly called jealousy. Commandment number 2, continuing. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 306. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. It is inevitable that children should suffer from the consequences of parental wrongdoing, but they are not punished for the parents' guilt, except as they participate in their sins. It is usually the case, however, that children walk in the steps of their parents. By inheritance and example, the sons become partakers of the father's sin. Wrong tendencies, perverted appetites, and debased morals, as well as physical disease and degeneracy, are transmitted as a legacy from father to son to the third and fourth generation. This fearful truth should have a solemn power to restrain man from following a course of sin. Showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. In prohibiting the worship of false gods, The second commandment by implication enjoins the worship of the true God. And to those who are faithful in his service, mercy is promised, not merely to the third and fourth generation, as is the wrath threatened against those who hate him, but to thousands of generations. The law of the Ten Commandments. Commandment number 3. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. This commandment not only prohibits false oaths and common swearing, but it forbids us to use the name of God in a light or careless manner without regard to its awful significance. By the thoughtless mention of God in common conversation, by appeals to him in trivial matters, and by the frequent and thoughtless repetition of his name, we dishonor him. According to Psalm chapter 111, verse 9, holy and reverend is his name. All should meditate upon his majesty, his purity and holiness, that the heart may be impressed with a sense of his exalted character, and his holy name should be uttered with reverence and solemnity. The law of the Ten Commandments. Commandment number 4. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 307. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. The Sabbath is not introduced as a new institution, but as having been founded at creation. It is to be remembered and observed as the memorial of the Creator's work. Pointing to God as the maker of the heavens and the earth, it distinguishes the true God from all false gods. All who keep the seventh day signify by this act that they are worshippers of Jehovah. Thus, the Sabbath is the sign of men's allegiance to God, as long as they are any upon the earth to serve him. The fourth commandment is the only one of all the 10 in which are found both the name and the title of the lawgiver. It is the only one that shows by whose authority the law is given. Thus, it contains the seal of God, affixed to his law as evidence of his authenticity and binding force. The law of the 10 Commandments, continuing with commandment number 4. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 307. God has given men 6 days wherein to labor, and he requires that their own work be done in the 6 working days. Acts of necessity and mercy are permitted on the Sabbath. The sick and suffering are at all times to be cared for, but unnecessary labor is to be strictly avoided. According to Isaiah chapter 58, verse 13, turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure. Nor does the prohibition end here, nor speaking thine own words, says the prophet. Those who discuss business matters or lay plans on the Sabbath are regarded by God as though engaged in the actual transaction of business. To keep the Sabbath holy, we should not even allow our minds to dwell upon things of a worldly character. And the commandment includes all within our gates. The inmates of the house are to lay aside their worldly business during the sacred hours. All should unite to honor God by willing service upon His holy day. The law of the Ten Commandments, Commandment number 5, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 308. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Parents are entitled to a degree of love and respect which is due to no other person. God Himself, who has placed upon them a responsibility for the souls committed to their charge, has ordained that during the earlier years of life, parents shall stand in the place of God to their children. And he who rejects the rightful authority of his parents is rejecting the authority of God. The fifth commandment requires children not only to yield respect, submission, and obedience to their parents, but also to give them love and tenderness, to lighten their cares, to guard their reputation, and to succor and comfort them in old age. It also enjoins respect for ministers and rulers, and for all others to whom God has delegated authority. This, says the apostle in Ephesians chapter 6 verse 2, is the first commandment with promise. To Israel, expecting soon to enter Canaan, it was a pledge to the obedient of long life in that good land. But it has a wider meaning, including all the Israel of God, and promising eternal life upon the earth when it shall be freed from the curse of sin. The law of the Ten Commandments. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 308. Commandment number 6. Thou shalt not kill. All acts of injustice that tend to shorten life, the spirit of hatred and revenge, or the indulgence of any passion that leads to injurious acts toward others, or causes us even to wish them harm, for whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer, a selfish neglect of caring for the needy or suffering, all self-indulgence or unnecessary deprivation or excessive labor that tends to injure health, all these are, to a greater or less degree, violations of the sixth commandment. Commandment number 7, thou shalt not commit adultery. This commandment forbids not only acts of impurity, but sensual thoughts and desires, or any practice that tends to excite them. Purity is demanded not only in the outward life, but in the secret intents and emotions of the heart. Christ, who taught the far-reaching obligation of the law of God, declared the evil thought or look to be as truly sin as is the unlawful deed. The law of the Ten Commandments. Patriarch and Prophet, page 308. Commandment number 8. Thou shalt not steal. Both public and private sins are included in this prohibition. The Eighth Commandment condemns man stealing and slave dealing and forbids wars of conquest. It condemns theft and robbery. It demands strict integrity in the minutest details of the affairs of life. It forbids overreaching in trade and requires the payment of just debts or wages. It declares that every attempt to advantage oneself by the ignorance, weakness, or misfortune of another is registered as fraud in the books of heaven. Commandment number 9. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. False speaking in any matter, every attempt or purpose to deceive our neighbor, is here included. An intention to deceive is what constitutes falsehood. by a glance of the eye, a motion of the hand, an expression of the countenance, a falsehood may be told as effectually as by words. All intentional overstatement, every hint or insinuation calculated to convey an erroneous or exaggerated impression, even the statement of facts in such a manner as to mislead, is falsehood. This precept forbids every effort to injure our neighbor's reputation by misrepresentation or evil surmising, by slander or tale-bearing. Even the intentional suppression of truth, by which injury may result to others, is a violation of the 9th commandment. The law of the 10 commandments. Commandment number 10. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 309. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. The 10 Commandments strikes at the very root of all sins, prohibiting the selfish desire from which springs the sinful act. He who in obedience to God's law refrains from indulging even a sinful desire for that which belongs to another will not be guilty of an act of wrong toward his fellow creatures. Such were the sacred precepts of the Decalogue, spoken amid thunder and flame, and with the wonderful display of the power and majesty of the great lawgiver. God accompanied the proclamation of his law with exhibitions of his power and glory, that his people might never forget the scene, and that they might be impressed with profound veneration for the author of the law, the creator of heaven and earth. He would also show to all men the sacredness, the importance, and the permanence of his law. The Law of the 10 Commandments, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 309. The people of Israel were overwhelmed with terror. The awful power of God's utterances seemed more than their trembling hearts could bear. For as God's great rule of right was presented before them, they realized as never before the offensive character of sin and their own guilt in the sight of a holy God. They shrank away from the mountain in fear and awe. The multitude cried out to Moses, "Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die." The leader answered, "Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not." The people, however, remained at a distance, gazing in terror upon the scene, while Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. The Law of the Statutes and Judgments, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 310. The minds of the people, blinded and debased by slavery and heathenism, were not prepared to appreciate fully the far-reaching principles of God's 10 precepts. That the obligations of the Decalogue might be more fully understood and enforced, additional precepts were given, illustrating and applying the principles of the 10 Commandments. These laws were called judgments, both because they were framed in infinite wisdom and equity, and because the magistrates were to give judgment according to them. Unlike the 10 Commandments, they were delivered privately to Moses, who was to communicate them to the people. The Law of Statutes and Judgments, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 364. Reading from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Now these are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, which the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that ye might do them in the land whither you go to possess it, that thou mightest fear the Lord thy God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee, thou and thy son, and thy son's son, all the days of thy life, and that thy days may be prolonged. God did not even then trust his precepts to the memory of a people who were prone to forget his requirements, but wrote them upon tables of stone. He would remove from Israel all possibility of mingling heathen traditions with his holy precepts, or of confounding his requirements with human ordinances or customs. But he did not stop with giving them the precepts of the Decalogue. The people had shown themselves so easily led astray that he would leave no door of temptation unguarded. Moses was commanded to write, as God should bid him, judgments and laws, giving minute instruction as to what was required. These directions, relating to the duty of the people to God, to one another, and to the stranger, were only the principles of the Ten Commandments amplified and given in a specific manner that none need err. They were designed to guard the secretness of the 10 precepts engraved on the tables of stone. We give you the link of numbers1317.org, file 19, for you to look at not only the definition, but also explanations of the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments. And in the library of 144,000 teachers, for which we give you the link, we give you the 613 biblical statutes recognized by the Hebrew people as they were studying those beautiful statutes in order to protect the 10 Commandments. Mount Sinai in Arabia, the law of God and the Ark of the Covenant. Review and Herald, May 6, 1875. In consequence of continual transgression, the moral law was repeated in awful grandeur from Sinai. Christ gave to Moses religious precepts which were to govern the everyday life. These statutes were explicitly given to guard the 10 Commandments. They were not shadowy types to pass away with the death of Christ. They were to be binding upon men in every age as long as time should last. These commands were enforced by the power of the moral law, and they clearly and definitely explained that law. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 364. After the completion of the tabernacle, God communicated with Moses from the cloud of glory above the mercy seat, and gave him full direction concerning the system of offerings and the forms of worship to be maintained in the sanctuary. The ceremonial law was thus given to Moses, and by him written in a book, which was kept, according to Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 26, by the side of the ark, the same as the statutes. But the law of the 10 Commandments, spoken from Sinai, had been written by God himself on the tables of stone and was secretly preserved inside the ark. The connection between the Ark of the Covenant, the law of God, Mount Sinai, and biblical archaeology. The connection between Mount Sinai, the law of God, and the Ark of the Covenant during the sojourn at Sinai around 1000 BC is evident. However, this connection has been repeated in our days, but in a different order. The discovery of the Ark of the Covenant containing the law of God in 1982 was followed with the discovery of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia in 1984 by Ron Wyatt and his team. This connection must be taken into consideration as it is not a coincidence. It is to prepare for the judgment of the living soon to come, with the Ark of the Covenant having been seen in the earth and the law as the standard of the judgment. The discoveries of the earthly Ark of the Covenant, built over 3,000 years ago, and of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia in 1982-1984, and the subsequent nuclear accidents, wars, terrorist attacks, tsunamis, floods, fires, are a warning of the judgment of the living, the test of the second Sunday law, and the second papal supremacy soon to come to pass. What the future holds remains to be seen. The Ark of the Covenant and Mount Sinai, discovered in 1982-1984. This discovery was followed in 1986 with the nuclear accident in Chernobyl, Ukraine. In 1991 with Desert Storm War. In 2001 with the terrorist attack on New York Twin Towers, and in 2004 with the terrible Indonesia tsunami, in 2011 the Syrian war and the refugees dispersed throughout the world, in 2014 ISIS and the establishment of a new caliphate, in 2019 the COVID-19 pandemic, in 2022 with the start of the Ukrainian war with Russia, in 2023 with the start of the Israel war with Palestine, in 2024 with the continuation of these wars to this day in 2025. The second Sunday law and the second papal supremacy are in the making. Archaeological evidences confirm the accuracy of the Bible, and more specifically in our days with the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem in 1982 and Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia in 1984. The connection is found in the Greek controversy, page 605. The Sabbath will be the great test of loyalty, for it is the point of truth especially controverted. When the final test shall be brought to bear upon man, then the line of distinction will be drawn between those who serve God and those who serve him not. While the observance of the false Sabbath in compliance with the law of the state, contrary to the fourth commandment, will be an avowal of allegiance to a power that is in opposition to God, the keeping of the true Sabbath in obedience to God's law is an evidence of loyalty to the Creator. Signs of the times, the ark seen in heaven and seen in earth. The Ark of the Covenant was seen in heaven in a vision in 1844 when Christ entered the most holy place. It marked the beginning of the investigative judgment of the dead, according to the prophecy of Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, and the 2300 days of years. It occurred after the end of the first papal supremacy in 1798. The Ark of the Covenant was seen in Earth with the discovery of the Ark in 1982, and this marked a preparation for a future test of the Sunday law and the investigative judgment of the living, ushering in the Second Papal Supremacy. The Mystery of the Ark of the Covenant Special Edition. The connection between Mount Sinai and Mount Zion, with thunder, lightning, trumpet, and the voice of God, which can be found in the book of Revelation. It will be a repetition of Exodus chapter 19, verses 18 to 20. And Mount Sinai was altogether on the smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount. And the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up.